Hello there everyone, and welcome to today's webinar where we're going to be talking through how to 23-proof your recruitment process. My name is David Clarkson. I'm the Head of Marketing at Testgrid, and I'm joined by Kellie Stoopman.
Good morning everyone, thanks for joining us.
Kellie's our Head of Customer at Testgrid. So today we're going to be talking about how to 23-proof your recruitment process. But before I go into that, just a bit about Testgrid, for those of you who are not familiar. We were founded in 1999. We're a psychometric assessment and HR technology company, and ultimately we make organisations make smarter and faster and fairer talent acquisition and development decisions. Okay, so I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. So our webinar has been held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. And also feel free to put into the chat of what nation you're joining from today as well. So just looking at today's webinar, we're going to start off looking at some trends and what's going to go into next year. So both economic and also what we're seeing in the recruitment space, and also some challenges as well. I'm going to have a look at kind of the impact of a bad hire. We'll get into that as we go into the webinar, but some of the things we've seen about organisations kind of dropping their recruitment process and kind of panic hiring. So we're just going to touch on some of the implications of that. Then we've pulled out some kind of like key solutions going into next year for both kind of addressing your internal kind of talent, accessing new pools of talent, and some ways to do that. And just we'll finish off with a Q&A session. So kicking off, just looking at some the trends going into next year. So may all be aware, increasing inflation and whatnot, that next year is looking going to be quite a challenging economy. We're seeing there's going to be like a decline in growth in the economy and an increase in unemployment. With that increase kind of going up to like just over 4% next year. So as a result of that, we're going to see kind of an inverse of what we're seeing at the moment, which is that essentially a candidate shortage with a number of roles available. So we're going to see that flip to a certain extent. And also there's going to be other factors which I'll bring up in the next slide, which are going to allow other candidates to come to the market. So there's also other things we've seen, the recent ATC, for example, just kind of touching on the kind of economic trends, the wages have increased over the last year. Combank said it's kind of increased by like 3% over the last year at the recent ATC conference. And what we've seen is that kind of there's been a lot of candidates, and as you're all aware, I'd imagine, as the kind of requesting kind of higher salary packages, and there's been a boost in sign-on bonuses and things like that. So as we kind of move into next year, a lot of the recruitment market, talent acquisition market, are looking to move away from that and focusing on some of the areas that we'll talk about later on. At the recent ATC conference, we spoke to a number of talent acquisition people, and we spoke to talent acquisition professionals and various people within organisations. And what we're seeing is that there's a number of what I'm going to talk about later on, which is kind of panic hiring, essentially dropping your current processes, is becoming. We're seeing quite a few organisations doing that within the market, and there's some challenges with that, which we'll address further on. Say, for example, Dan Murphy's, where you can now walk in and pretty much get an interview on the spot. So this kind of like panic hiring is something we've been seeing across the market for a few months, but I'm going to touch on moving into next year. Is that really something you want to continue to do? Say, for example, I've recently heard about a professional services organisation which dropped just video interviewing from the recruitment processes and vastly ended up trying to make it easier for candidates, but ended up increasing their time to hire greatly, and also kind of end up giving a very, very poor candidate experience. And just on that, some of the insights that we've got from our clients is that in this current market and the talent shortages that we have, what we're actually seeing is engagement rates are up, and we're seeing completion rates are up. Just one government client for us, for example, recently reported an increase from kind of mid-80s to a 97% completion rate. So essentially kind of some of the things we're seeing at the moment. So just kind of moving on into some of the other things that are going to be kind of going on next year, and we're going to be seeing that uplift in talent. But before I kind of move on from that, I just really like this quote from Justin Fable or Fable, I'm not actually quite sure, from the Macri Group, and just in a recent article, you said, in this environment, it's important to remember short-term thinking can be detriment to long-term goals. And the reason, I mean, yes, we're looking to next year, but there's been a kind of obviously a market shift given the current position that the market's in, and it's today's webinar is really to kind of pose that as a question. Is that something you want to move into next year in a challenging economy? And we'll look into that. Okay, so just one of the things that's going to be that's going to boost essentially the talent in the market next year. So essentially what we're going to see is more candidates and less jobs. It's going to be essentially the investment the Australian government is making into to boost immigration at the moment. You might have heard about the migration caps being lifted to 195,000 places. The government invested just over 36 million to hire people to process visa applications. So that means people that are perhaps back home in Scotland or the UK where I'm from, or that have been waiting to come here, are now actually going to be coming. So there's like a real investment, real shift there, which maybe I'm aware of if you've been reading up on the government's plans. So ultimately what we're going to see is a talent uplift and an intake of overseas talent, and it's going to, I find a good stat on my macro business that stated is going to be higher than in 2008, which was 316,000 overseas migrants coming over, and apparently it's going to dwarf that entirely. So that's something that we need to prepare for, prepare to screen those candidates. And just looking at some of the occupations that are in those that are in demand and are being accommodated with that type of activity. I'm just going to call out a few, not kind of go through this list, but registered nurses dwarfing the entirety of this chart here, but things like software application programmers, engineers, database and systems administrators, and these are some things that we can talk about later on. And so just these are some of the areas, and yeah, just some Australian government data here about the computer systems and engineering and tech being an area where there's a shortage. Just touching on some challenges, and today's webinar we cover quite a lot, and I just kind of threw these kind of bullet points in just to kind of essentially just kind of tick them off. We do also have a recruitment guide which we'll be sharing after the webinar. But just some things that are touched on within that document. Economic uncertainty and recruitment are essentially covered. Internal mobility being a major thing that organisations are focusing on next year, which we'll touch on later on this. in this presentation. Culture as well, focus on culture, hiring for culture, something that's always been there as a kind of driver, but it's so important now when it comes to retention in challenging times. Work-life integration, so hybrid working essentially been such a major demand in the market, as we're all aware. But some of the data I've seen that candidates are not looking for the ideal role anymore. It's okay, let's find a great role, but that has that balance, and just really how important that is. And then just some other kind of things we're seeing as well, such as like short-term hires and boomerang employees being not just something we're seeing in the market, but actually a bit of a focus for organisations as well. So just kind of listening through some of those there. But ultimately what I want to do is just kind of touch on the what I mentioned earlier on about dropping those processes. And I feel with this webinar, we just kind of want to kind of reiterate the kind of some of the costs of doing that. So here's a green frog. For anyone, for anyone who saw us at the AGE or the ATC conference in Sydney, both brilliant conferences, and we basically had a funnel of candidates, but we use lollies essentially. And at the top of the funnel, unfortunately for the green frogs, they were our bad hires, or our candidates that weren't right for the organisation. And then we had kind of various other lollies that such as like love hearts and things that kind of represent like high emotional intelligence and things like that. Anyway, so essentially the pure green frog though was essentially our kind of bad hire. And I just kind of making that point just to kind of talk about, okay, if you're dropping your certain processes out your funnel, and a lot of this is kind of like back to basics really, but if you're dropping those processes, what else are you dropping? Are you dropping your values? You're dropping your criteria, only to get people in the door, and just kind of talk about some of the risks to that. So a bit of a kind of fear factor in with these couple of slides, I suppose. But yeah, just looking at the cost of essentially kind of to rehire employees being at like 23,000. Got some of the time stats over here on the right hand side. I mean, the average time to fill a vacant position is 40 days. If someone comes in the organisation as it isn't right and then has to move on, we're talking about a lot of cost and a lot of time. And it's something that's obviously something that we always try and manage is in the talent acquisition industry. But I want to talk about moving into next year and just kind of really reiterate that some of these challenges. Okay, so there's cost and there's timing, and we've got some other things as well that is going to be an issue as well. So I mentioned values, which Kellie will talk about. But essentially, I've created this kind of like what I see as a cycle. So you've got your panic hiring, and you're using various kind of like strategies just to get people in the door, right? And everyone knows a lot of this stuff as well, but just kind of really kind of reiterating it. But say, for example, 1 in 5 people at the best of times, I really can't iterate when you see those brackets, at the best of times, it's 1 in 5 people fail that probation period or discover that's not right for them, that for the organisation. So then you've got the additional training that's involved in that. Then you get the rehiring with the cost that we just spoke about there. Then have a look at some other implications as well. So culture damage, what is the kind of effect on not just the culture, but also kind of like absenteeism, accidents and things, because you're just not doing your usual vetting process. And then just looking at the rate of attrition, which again, at the best of times is at 20%. What is that going to move up to if you've completely kind of abandoned certain processes? So we're going to look at how you can still continue to use your processes, but access different pools of talent next year. And then just one of the other things as well, just some other things to take in consideration because you can say, oh, cost and time, great, but some specific examples being cyber security risk. We don't really need to kind of talk about what happened with Optus recently, for example, we have assessments based all about cybersecurity and the competencies and behaviours to look out for and to assess for, to kind of boost that cybersecurity mitigation. And one thing as well is that, I mean, I've kind of pulled out probation here within the slide, but think about your organisation over the next 5 years, and at different levels as well. If someone might actually come into the organisation who's just not a great fit, but you had to have that bums on seats kind of mentality, and they could stay with the organisation for years, and they're just not a culture add, and it could have a detrimental effect on the organisation. So just some things to take into consideration. But ultimately, is this a great strategy to move into 2023? Having all these challenges, a tough economic climate where you really want your business to be operating at optimum levels, and when you may not have the right people that can work together or perform, kind of step up to the plate, then it could cause further challenges further down the line. So I'm now just going to hand over to Kellie, who's going to talk about just a couple of solutions. And alrighty.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, that great frame up. I think certainly, you know, looking like a challenging year, but not one without opportunities. So really, I guess my focus for today was really wanting to just, I guess, dig into some of those opportunities around our recruitment process and things that can set us up for success next year. So the 3 areas that I actually want to cover today is firstly around internal mobility. And as David mentioned, I also want to touch on the importance of values alignment. And then lastly, I want to just touch on neurodivergent candidates, very underrepresented, and certainly there's some opportunity in that space. So if I jump into our first topic around internal mobility, I guess the question is really, what is driving this trend around a focus on internal mobility? And there's quite a bit of data around that. So what we're seeing is skill sets for jobs are changing substantially. So according to LinkedIn, we've seen a 25% change since 2015, and that trend is expected to continue. And at the same time, we also know that competition will continue to be fierce for some of those in-demand skills that David was talking about before. So really, a lot of us are starting to think about what can we do now to support upskilling in our own organisations and grow our own internal talent pool. And really, when you think about why internal mobility is so important, again, there's heaps of data that sort of says investing in professional development opportunities leads to higher employee retention. And more interestingly, LinkedIn actually highlighted that organisations with high mobility see even greater benefits, like with employee retention, you know, at twice that of someone, you know, or organisations that have lower internal mobility. So there's definitely a lot of really good kind of reasons to be focused on that, on this area. So when we kind of think about the solution approach, you know, for internal candidates at this point, we often have a solid view of kind of how people are going in terms of their job specific capabilities. So really it's about thinking about how do we assess for potential within the organisation. And at Testgrid, we've got a number of assessments that can really assist you in that process of evaluating current capabilities. And what's really important here is ensuring that the assessments that you use are really high validity and are predictive of job performance. There's lots of solutions out there, but, you know, again, just to really reinforce that message, it's about making sure we've got the right tools and it gives you reasonable prediction of job performance. A great internal recruitment process should also create value for your employees. And I think everyone's very mindful of that, you know, through internal recruitment, you know, you want to retain the talent you've got, and you want to also be able to highlight in a really constructive way where there's development areas. And when we look at kind of leadership roles in particular, behavioural and emotional intelligence assessments, we're seeing a lot more of our customers using these tools because they do just provide incredibly valuable insights on strengths. And they also kind of give an indication of what impact individuals are likely to have at the next level. So So super valuable to have in your internal recruitment process, particularly around leaders. So really, when we look at those solutions, and I'm keen to chat a little bit more around what we mean when we talk about customised competency or capability assessment frameworks. So we might just jump into that, Dave, on the next slide.
Yep.
So having your own framework is obviously, which I'm sure many of you do, is incredibly important in terms of driving focus, alignment and decision making within your organisation. So one good approach, and one that we're really passionate about at Testgrid, is actually helping our clients to, in a way that helps to focus on those critical competencies and capabilities. So our process in working with our customers is really quite consultative. We've got an expert team who will start with a review of your organisational competencies, or you might have a leadership capability framework, or if you don't, we can help define these for you. So we'll really start there, and then and the next stage in that process is that we will map these to the relevant high validity assessments and actually create a customised approach for you across various roles or levels in your organisation. And one of the big advantages of doing that, outside of, you know, it's laser focused on what you need and what you're looking for, but you also get a really customised output report, a tailored interview guide and a development guide, which are really great tools for hiring managers and leaders to quickly identify potential and best fit when it's in a recruitment scenario. So if this is something you're interested in learning more about, we'd love to have a chat to you about how this solution could be adding value in your business. So the next topic, sorry, David,
it's really interesting from an internal mobility point of view, because it is such a kind of hot topic at the moment. It's been mentioned at a number of conferences we go to. It's just all over the kind of industry, and just kind of building that profile of your employees and kind of getting to know your employees as they come in the door with various kind of assessments, but also kind of building a profile when they're in, really kind of indicates what pathways and areas, those pathways to development, etc., and what ways we can actually move them about the organisation. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree, and I think having been part of one internal recruitment, I think you know, that it's also part of your EVP. I think, you know, employees are really looking to understand, how do I grow in your organisation? What's the pathway? What's expected? What's needed at the next level? So yeah. I think that will really...
We've seen a lot now in Testgrid, particularly our customer success, starting off with kind of support, and because you get to know the product so much, and you get to know the customers and their needs, etc., then a pathway just is into customer success is just one of the ones that that we've seen in Testgrid. So anyway, I'll stop interrupting.
Great example. And probably good segue. So the next topic I wanted to talk about is really around that values alignment. And really where I'm going with this is it's about prioritising those checks around values alignment in your recruitment process. And I know David spoke about bad hires. I've got an example of bad apples. And I think, you know, it's no longer acceptable in organisations really to have poor alignment. And we've certainly seen some well publicised examples at a leadership level or at a celebrity level. Dave, I think you were talking about Kanye West and Adidas recently.
Yeah, I guess a kind of cultural example, but still an example. I mean, that one being an external, I guess, brand ambassador having the impact that he's had on Adidas, and we might have all be aware of what's going on there, that he's been dropped. Balenciaga, for example, been another one. A very a bit of a topic that obviously I'm going to stay away from, but what has basically happened there is that it's been a complete failure, and the people who are there to make those kind of decisions. I'm not going to go into the topic of it and in terms of how they've managed it, but that is a clear indication that essentially a bad apple or a bad or a green frog has joined the organisation, and then there's been a series of bad decisions, and it's ultimately resulted in some major reputational damage. And it doesn't always have to be at the kind of senior level. I mean, just thinking of an example off the top of my head, I remember seeing back home in the UK, you've got Tesco, which is essentially one of the big retail brands. You've got obviously Coles and Woolworths over here. Tesco is one of the big ones back home. I remember one of their employees went to social media to scream. It became a viral video to scream about dealing with customers and things. So it doesn't always have to be that top level. That reputational risk is extremely real. And then just like I mentioned earlier on, from a cybersecurity perspective, cybersecurity is all essentially about human error. And if you're not kind of weeding those kind of poor behaviours out, then the risk is massive. Like I said, Optus being a perfect example of that. So anyway, I'll stop giving examples.
No worries. No, thank you. The other one that's interesting too, Atlassian, for those of you who've had a look at their values, are really, they've done quite a bit of research in this area as well. And so from a hiring perspective, they're, very clear now in their process that people need to align. And I think it's not just for organisational benefit, it's also for ensuring that right cultural fit. There's nothing worse than having someone who doesn't fit the culture but has the skills, and I think that step avoids that bad apple scenario, or it just it avoids the attrition that you were talking about earlier as well, Dave. So it's a tricky one, but I think the challenge really here is to have a proactive process that assesses for culture and value fit. So there's a number of ways that you can think about doing that, whether you include a values profile or a situational judgment test or some recruitment journey, or you leverage kind of behavioural or emotional intelligence assessments are also quite valuable for giving you a perspective on that values fit. So but again, you really today it's really important to just minimise that risk of bad hire and poor culture fit. And importantly, from an efficiency point of view, get to the best candidates quickly and reduce the effort and time involved in that final stage of recruitment. There's nothing more disappointing than, having, starting with 15 in your talent pool and then recognising right at the last minute that potentially the fit's not right. So, so again, really happy to chat to any of our customers or anyone who's interested in kind of understanding how to incorporate a bit more of this into their process. So the last topic that is super interesting, and we're obviously doing a bit of work in this space, is around neurodivergent candidates. This is one area that we're kind of we're thinking about where are some of the untapped talent sitting in the market today, and neurodiverse candidates, really is an area that is often overlooked. It's estimated that there's around 3 million people who identify as neurodiverse in Australia today. And many neurodivergent people have amazing natural talents, sustained concentration, faster problem solving, superior memory, strong attention to detail, and high integrity. So, David, I know you were talking before about where there's some skill shortages, and I know that there's been a bit of a crossover where we've seen, some success of neurodivergent candidates.
Yeah, I guess, and we kind of work with Exceptional closely on this. There's a number of these traits that we speak about neurodivergent candidates. There's a number of these traits going to come up, like high attention to detail and things like that, which are all true. Those lend themselves to roles like kind of like development and things like that, and kind of analytical roles. But that's often quite a bit of a stigma in itself, because you're like, okay, well, they can only do these type of roles, and you're like, not at all. If you actually speak to us and you speak we start talking about the exceptional assessment, you begin to learn about some of the other kind of pathways that and some of the other roles that neurodivergent candidates excel in as well, just the same as we all do, such as leadership or customer service. So yeah, but yeah, just what you're saying about that kind of, yeah, they're very, these candidates are very overlooked in terms of in the market at the moment. It's something like it's one in 10 people actually identify as neurodiverse. Something like 80% of the global autistic population is unemployed, and it's just a kind of area. I mean, I see it online. Essentially, part of my job is essentially to kind of go out and what are people talking about at the moment, and it's and yeah, neurodivergent candidates comes up a lot, but there's never any, there's discussion around, okay, once neurodivergent candidates comes in, and it's like, okay, well, how can you facilitate that, which is great. Things like, in certain instances, noise cancelling headphones and things like that can be used, but then there's doesn't seem to be many organizations talking about the recruitment process. I'm very conscious this is your slide, Kelly, but I've just gone back to some conversations I've had with Aaron, Exceptional, and our last webinar that we did on neurodivergent candidates. He spoke about essentially that first of all, these candidates are being overlooked entirely. They may not even apply to your organization in the first place, because they may not feel represented, or the process doesn't represent them. They may join the process and fall out. So consider that if 1 in 10 people could identify as neurodiverse, then essentially that's 10% of it could be 10% of your pipeline. Just kind of have a think about that kind of thing. It's not just about this kind of pool of talent over here, which is underrepresented, which is true, and should be, your processes should reflect that. It's also kind of having a think about, okay, these candidates may already be in your pipeline and they're not being represented. Yeah, and I guess one quote from Aaron that kind of stuck out to me was, he was talking about somebody who's going through the recruitment process, and he's saying like essentially a wrong answer spoken confidently is often given higher regard of a wrong answer. Oh, sorry, I've said that wrong. Sorry, sorry, I've said it. A wrong answer spoken confidently is almost given more regard as a right answer said quietly while staying on the ground. And yeah, so that your process needs to reflect that, and so your assessments.
I think that's, yeah, well said. I think it is indeed often the recruitment and interview process is to blame. It does rely, or it does advantage people who are good at self-promotion, even things like eye contact, and confidence. So it's a very, very valid call out. And as David mentioned, we're really excited to be working closely with Exceptional, who are a leader in inclusive employment for neurodivergent people. So the solution that is now available, and there hasn't really been a lot of tools around assessment for neurodiversity, is so Exceptional have created an online skills-based assessment that's actually been built by an autistic team. So by people who, we are looking at in this talent pool. So it's a unique activity-based technology. So really it can help support you in reaching that largely untapped group, but also more importantly, it just allows a much better candidate experience. So for people who identify as neurodivergent, this is a way for them to really demonstrate their skills in an online environment. So without that kind of bias in traditional recruitment processes. So again, really exciting space. It's definitely a pioneering space, and we would love to, we'd love to chat about how, this might be a solution for your business. So please reach out.
All right. So just going to do a bit of a summary before we finish up. So yeah, we're heading into a kind of challenging economic climate, pretty much undoubtedly. going to be a bit of a candidate uplift as a result of the unemployment and as a result of, like I said, the migrants coming to Australia, and it's really kind of summarise it as fail to prepare, prepare to fail. I don't know why I can't speak today. That's kind of how I kind of see kind of next year going if those processes are dropped and you're not taking advantage of those opportunities that we spoke about, as well as kind of like oversee some other trends as well that we saw, because we were quite cautious of kind of over kind of packing this presentation. We try to keep it as a kind of half an hour. But the recruitment guide will go into a bit more detail, but there is other things as well, like kind of hiring overseas talent. Only 25% of organisations are doing that at the moment. Kind of stop kind of focusing on the resume, and a lot of organisations are doing great work hiring kind of older candidates than they were before. There's a lot of kind of areas to take a lot of opportunities. So yeah, and then just those the solutions that we spoke about. So that internal mobility, the customized frameworks, and really that's the one that sticks out for me is the values alignment, because the things we're seeing going on right now and the cost, not just from an organisation point of view, think about the jobs that are being lost as a result of the impact of these stories that we're hearing, especially like Optus, for example, and not the reputation risk as well. And then just neurodivergent candidates, that's one that we really can't emphasise enough, and it's something we're going to continue to champion. We pretty much started talking about neurodivergent candidates last year. We had our webinar last year, and it's something we've spoken about it for a while, but I've not really seen many, to be perfectly honest, organisations kind of tackling it, and it's something that we're looking to do, and we're looking for partners to do that with us, and we have the tools to do so. So just going to leave it there, and if anyone's got any questions, then feel free to ask them, and I'll take an opportunity just to promote the guide that we spoke about there. So that will be coming out in the next few days. I'll just be emailing that out and putting it online, so keep an eye out for that. So anyone's got any questions? Give that a minute. All righty. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it there. Thank you everyone for joining. If anyone does have any questions, then feel free to email hello@Testgrid, or myself, which is david.clarkson@testgrid.com. And then I always like to say, if anyone's got any feedback on the webinar, if you get any questions, if you've got any data that you're like to explore, or yeah, any information you'd like to see, then reach out to us. Thanks, Kellie, for supporting me today in the webinar, and thanks for your input. It was really great. Thanks, everyone.
David, thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.